back to beyoungministry.blogspot.com and to another podcast out of the second chapter of Galatians. Today we're in Galatians chapter 2, verses 7 through 10, which reads, "On the contrary, they recognized that I had been entrusted with the task of teaching or preaching the gospel to the uncircumcised, just as Peter had been to the circumcised. For God, who is at work in Peter as an apostle to the circumcised, was also at work in me as an apostle to the Gentiles. James, Cephas, and John, those esteemed as pillars, gave me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship when they recognized the grace given to me. They agreed that we should go to the Gentiles, and they to the circumcised. All they asked was that we should continue to remember the poor, the very thing I had been eager to do all along." Galatians chapter 2, verses 7 through 10. In today's text, we learn that the early church leaders commissioned Paul to preach to the uncircumcised, or the Gentiles, and Peter to the circumcised, or to the Jew. In addition, we learn of one of Peter's failures. This story is not recorded in the book of Acts, and Peter himself doesn't comment on it in his own writings. Before the Apostle Peter became a follower of Christ, he was a fisherman. After a year of following him and his teachings, Peter then left everything to follow Jesus. Like us, Peter's relationship with the Lord was one of spiritual ragged progress, in which God trained him to be dependent on God's transforming grace. Like all of us, Peter experienced some failures along the way, which were useful for his success in his faith walk with the Lord. Same is true for us. It's not this one nice continuum of growth. No, it's jagged, it's ragged, it's up and down, it's all around, it's a mess. And if we're honest with most people about that aspect of our faith, they get bothered. And that's because they got bad theology. So tell them to get over it. As the gospel spread to the believing Jews or Gentiles, they became a part of the church, and as a result, controversy started to brew. The Jewish leaders believed that these new converts should have to become Jews, and one of the big teachings in Judaism was circumcision. However, as we have seen in previous blogs, requiring the Gentiles to be circumcised created a big problem between Paul and Peter. And this is where we are in our text today. Like I have said many, many times before, when we lose sight of what our relationship with God is all about, we will make it about the most insignificant things. The Jewish Christians here were afraid of losing their culture. To lose the culture that God has given is not good, but to lose the culture that man gives, well, that's another story. And the Jews had changed the purpose of circumcision. That's what created all of this problem. These Jews were treating circumcision differently than what God gave it for. You see, the heart of God, as spelled out in the scriptures, is always for the needy. And it's just not the needy, it's the needy who recognize their need for God. There are a lot of people who are needy in the world and never are served by the need. In verse 10 here, the apostle accentuates this value of God, where he wrote, "All they asked was that we should continue to remember the poor, the very thing I had been eager to do all along." It is not just the poor. It's the poor who are being served by their poverty to cry out to God. You see, a forgiving heart is a compassionate heart. In this passage, in verse 9, Paul writes that James, Cephas, and John, those esteemed as pillars, gave me, notice that word gave, that's a root word for grace. They graced me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship when they recognized the grace given to me, or the grace gracing to me. Grace is all over this passage, and you'll see it's all over this book. And when we've experienced the grace of God, we gain the heart of God. That's why I say a forgiven heart is a compassionate heart. The disciples had seen the Lord Jesus value the needy in his ministry. In fact, in Matthew 25, Jesus said, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was thirsty and you gave me drink, and so forth. And of course, he went on to say, those who were hungry and thirsty and you gave them food and drink, you were doing it to me. In addition, Zacchaeus gave half of his possessions to the poor. And Jesus responded by saying, today salvation has come to this house. You'll see that story in Luke chapter 19. But such is the case in our walk with God. When we walk with him, he gives us his heart, not just for him, but for others. In fact, our heart for him is seen best in our heart for others. The apostles agreed on the importance of ministry to the poor because it flows from the center of the gospel, which is the cross. If we see people with needs and do not respond in some way, a window in our heart closes. In response to the question, why does God allow some to be poor? Charles Spurgeon once said, there are many reasons. One is to give us, who are favored with enough, an opportunity of showing our love to Jesus. End quote. I have discovered that when I have been most mindful that I need God, I was most blessed. And the opposite is true. When I am least mindful of my need for God, I'm most cursed. Not of God, but cursed by the situation, by my choice. So it's a good thing to be impoverished. It's not necessarily a bad thing to be rich, just as long as we recognize the purpose of those riches. In Deuteronomy 10:16 we read, circumcise then your heart and stiffen your neck no more. Also in Deuteronomy chapter 30 and verse 6 we read, moreover the Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the heart of your descendants to love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, in order that you may live. And it's not talking about justification. It's talking about living a life that Christ died to give us. You see, a sure sign that we are growing in our walk with the Lord is that we are gaining his heart for the needy. My friend, I trust these blog spots are helpful to you, these podcasts. If I can be of any help to you, don't hesitate to shoot me an email at beyoungministry@gmail.com. Hey, have a great day.